And is it starting? Yes, it's starting. Yeah, okay. Now make a dramatic entrance. Okay. Good evening. Welcome, despite the incredible rain.
You see, it's just the middle piece is.
Don't worry, that's all right. It was working. We did. My partner here. We set this all up before. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Yeah. So this is, of course, Tza'iri Kal Chassidim here in Shaare Chesed, who are the hosts and sponsors of the Shaare, and we're looking at the Alshich. It's Parshas Vayechi. We're not looking at it straight away, so don't grab your pages yet. I've got some. It needs I think this needs a Hagdoma, rather like last week's Shaare needed a Hagdoma as well. And the Hagdoma is in two places. Maybe I'll just tell you what the Rambam says in his Igris Hashmad. Very interesting. Amasha royal shadeehu, and the thing it's roy for me to let you know. She'ein roy la'odam ladaber or lidrash be'ozneaham. It's not fitting for anybody to stand up in front of a choshev kehila chevra like we have here tonight and give a drosha achi yaser al mashur etzona ladaber, unless you've gone over what you want to say, the shiur that you're about to give, pam, shtayim, shlosha, va'arba. Right? You've got to go over and over many, many times. V'yeshan isahetiv, v'akachachidaber, till you really, really know your material, I suppose you could put it that way, the Torah that you want to say over, and then you can speak. But if you haven't done that hachana, you really shouldn't. And turning many pages before this, in his Maimer Techiyas Amesim, this is the Igris Rambam, which he wrote to the Jews of Yemen when they were facing forced conversion in those days to Christianity, because the Yemenis had become Christians. Then, of course, a new religion came along with a very persuasive argument. Those of you who have seen the flag of Saudi Arabia will know what's on it. Some verses from the Quran and a very persuasive argument. The big sword, that scimitar. So, you're makabel this, or it's yiskadav yiskadash. However you say that in Arabic. Anyway, so the Rambam writes here, and when he's trying to be mechazik them, but tzedek kol imri pi ein bahem nifto be'ikish. It is correct, right, that everything you say, everything that comes out your mouth, has to be correct and will not trip somebody up. And then he brings a posset from Mishli, Odom, Oram, Kisi Das, someone who is an Oram, that means Chochem in this context. Then he covers his knowledge. But fools like to declare. They don't keep their stupidity to themselves. They like to let everybody know exactly how stupid they are. Then he says, Enze buti mitzutmoy, she is kavana odom leber is ha'inyonim, klamer inyan mishpat masuim, bedivri hasber, beshutim abrurim shadai behem lahoser kol sofik v'lesadik efshoris ba'or echot. It has to be, it has to be, says the Rambam, when you're going to speak and you're going to say something, you have to make sure there is no room for mistakes, misunderstanding, lack of clarity to the Torah point that you're trying to convey. If there's any ambiguity, any suffix in what you're teaching, by definition, you've laid a trap for somebody to get the wrong idea. So if you're teaching, apart from the fact that you are you've got to have your material, as it were, the Torah that you under your belt or in your hand. But you also got to make sure when you're saying it over, there can't be anything in what you're saying that the people don't get. I was once sitting there was a wonderful magazine. Have you come across the Jewish Observer? It was a wonderful magazine. And I was once sitting at Chesed in Muncie in New York when I lived in America. And the editor of the paper, it folded by then, retired. He'd retired, and I don't know why it didn't carry on, because I think it was the best of the magazines, apart from the one I write for Hamadiyah, which is even better. Anyway, so he was telling me, we were schmoozing, and where did I come from, and where had I been to Yeshiva, Gateshead, etc. And we got onto the subject of Rabbi Dessler. So he said he'd heard Rabbi Dessler speak, and I got very excited about this. I don't think there are any cassettes of Rabbi Dessler speaking. And somebody told me he regretted that. When they first brought them out in Ponevezh and stuff like, places like that, it was considered to be very cheremdik. However, it's a pity because I would love to have heard him speak. I said, was he a great speaker? He said he was a good speaker, is what he said. He was a good speaker. But his eye as a teacher for his audience was perfect. He wanted to give an example, and the example he wanted to give was based on a car's engine. Well, the old-fashioned cars that had pistons, and those are all electric and stuff like that. And he wanted to say the piston going, of course, the piston goes down, the other one goes up. Now, I've got to try and remember how he did this. So Rabbi Desta says the piston goes down and up. Down and up. And so, very interesting. He said, do you see what you did? I said, no, I'll do it to you again. Piston goes down and up. Down and up. So I still didn't get it. He said, if you were doing it, what would you do? You would do down and then up. But he realized that his audience would be seeing it as a mirror image the other way around. So that's down for them. The real teacher has to work out, the mechanic has to work out, how are people seeing this? How are people hearing this? So let me read a little bit more of the Rambam. However, people who want to get it wrong, who want to misunderstand you, you've done all the work. You've got the Torah under your belt, etc., and you've got your material in your hand. But still, there are people here who would dafka want to misinterpret what you say. One of the big milas when I started in my career was that there were cassette recorders everywhere. Because people always say, I heard you said, people love being offended. I heard you said, but nowadays there's a tape, and of course there's these things. So everybody knows the record of what I said. No, I said, no, I didn't. I said something else. And look, we can rewind the tape and you can see it. Asher niskaven levero. Kvar ira ki yosef zeh b'divrei Hashem yisale. Not only is this a terrible common flaw, but not and that they can intentionally misinterpret what you say, but they can even misinterpret what Hashem Yisborach says. And he says, "Look, Hashem niskaven rabban shall call hanevim lo adiyana mitzvahs Hashem shehu yisale echad." When the greatest Nevi'im of all, Moshe Rabbeinu, wants to tell Klal Yisrael the nature, the tev of Hashem Yisborach, Kavyochel, and the fact that there is nobody except Hashem, he expresses it in the most famous tefillah of all, the most famous Jewish tefillah of all, which is what? Shema. And through saying these words, perfectly crafted words, Moshe Rabbeinu's words, which is all the words from Hashem himself, then what did he say? To explain exactly who and what Hashem is, he said, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Easy. But the Christians learn from that posuk a raya that they're right. Ki Hashem Yisala Shlishi L'Shosha. That they, in fact, 3 in 1. There are 3 gods. Why? Shema Yisrael, Hashem, Elokeinu, Hashem, Echad. Right? And then he goes on to say, interestingly, V'im zeh ira b'divrei Hashem. And if that's what they can do to the words of Hashem Yisborach himself, kal v'chomer she'ira ki yosef zeh b'divrei Adam. How much more can they take the words that a person said, a human being says, corrupt and twist and pervert them to mean something different? But words are absolutely critical. And we are people of words. I remember once in London, there was a big Shabbaton weekend, and there was somebody called Rabbi Professor Dr. David Gottlieb. I don't know if you've come across him. He teaches at Or Sameach. I think he's one of the most brilliant minds I've ever met. Total genius. And there was another rabbi, he was a friend of mine, and he was giving a shiur, and he got onto the subject of talking about Purim. Maybe it was Purim time, I can't remember. And he said something about, and Haman did a lottery. So immediately, Professor Gottlieb just jumped down his throat and said, it wasn't a lottery, it was lots. And this young rabbi made the mistake of saying, same thing. He said, oh no, Rabbi, it's not the same thing. Words matter. And of course, there's an enormous difference between a lottery and lots. It's just that the rabbi wasn't sensitive to that. But words are incredible. Words can totally create something, which is positive or destructive. Okay. So words describe things. Positively or negatively, ideas can be fruitful, helpful, described and passed on through words, or they can be extremely corrupting. Even though they're right, you've got to anticipate how the audience is seeing it, this way or that way. Are you doing it the wrong way? So the right way is that's down to your audience. But if you're not, they can be seeing it the wrong way. I'm sure I've told you this idea before. This is the Shem Mishmuel, who's my consistently favorite Hasidic parish. So Hiksha Shem Mishmuel. Hari below HaKadosh Baruch Hu Otzi Es Mitzrayim, lo heis the Kabbalah Satorah. Now, it says in Haggadah, we all know this, if Hashem had not taken us out from there, we would be Meshubah to Para Mitzrayim. So says the Shem Mishmuel, but if Hashem had not taken us out, there would have been no Kabbalah Satorah. Right? Fine. And if we hadn't gone out, and we're not Makabal the Torah, the world would have reverted to Toihu V'Voihu. Consequently, what does it mean? We would still be Mishubodim to Paro in Mitzrayim. There would be no Mitzrayim. There would be no planet Earth for Mitzrayim to be part of. So what's it talking about? Kamosha Rosh Gazal and the Gemara Avodah Zarah famously says, Shetanai Hisna Kodesh Baruch in my Bereshis. Hashem made a condition with my Bereshis, Im Lo Yikal B'Li Yisrael Es Torah and Im Machzir Eskem L'Toivavo. We'll go back to Toivavo. Ketzad Omer said, how can the God of Sibra? It says, the Yoshev, so this is what he says. Shem Yishmael says, Ki tohu v'vohu enum ha'eder muchlat. The Hebrew here is interesting. He says, Ki tohu v'vohu. How would you translate tohu v'vohu? Sorry? Avoid. That's a good word. An astonishingly emptiness. Well, that's a very... I think he's won the prize so far. I'm not going to ask anybody else because that's so good, okay? But he says, Vayeshikini sohu uvohu enum ha'eder muchlat. It is not a complete state of nothingness. What was your translation?
I mean, Rashi says it's like...
Rashi says, yes, yeah.
Astonishment of how empty it is.
Emptiness. Empty means nothing, right? A vacuum. He says it's not that. And that's what everybody thinks, and that's how I would have translated it as well. But he says it's not so. It's a complete nothing. No, Hashem created Tohu V'Vohu, and then from Tohu V'Vohu he goes on to create the universe. It's not that had Klal Yisrael refused to accept the Torah, the world would revert to nothing, emptiness. Rather, Ela L'Tohu V'Vohu. Go back to a state which is called Tohu V'Vohu. That would be a world without Klal Yisrael. It can exist without Klal Yisrael, but it would be an extremely terrible world without Klal Yisrael. So here are some words that tell us an idea, but the idea is profoundly dangerous. We kind of hope that the world realizes how precious Jews are. In fact, a non-Jewish friend of mine phoned me up just this week. We were boys in school together. It's called Robert McLean. And if Robert is watching this, hello, Robert. And he said, can I ask you a question? Don't be upset about this, but I'm being sincere. Why does the world hate Jews so much? Why does the world hate Jews so much? Of course, this is the classic question. No, I didn't, he's not religious, so I wasn't going to say, well, it's all because of the Malach of... no, I was going to say that sort of stuff. I said, I think it's very strange. Remember we were in school, I said to him, the guys who were in our school, in elementary school and primary school, there were 4 rows. There was the really, really bright ones. I think that was row A. Then there was row B. They were pretty bright. Then there was my row. And then there was row D, and B, C, D, yeah. And I won't tell you what they were like, but they were really bad. So basically, what did we feel about row A? We were not fans. We were jealous. And we resented the fact that when the teacher was teaching mathematics, which always left me baffled, I was very good at English and very good at arithmetic. It's when they combined them. That's when I was lost. 2A plus 3B. A, B, 2, 3, and I've got the thing. Anyway, Bekitzer, I said to him, if you think about what we are, we're 0.02 of humanity, and how many Nobel Prizes have been won by Jews, and not just Nobel Prizes, hey, we're clever, but the cure for polio, Jonas Salt, the cure for bubonic plague, when we get the blame for bubonic plague, another Jew from Ukraine, and on and on and on. So I said, maybe it's that. I wanted to give a simple reason. But the world without Jews would still have bubonic plague, would still have polio, and so much other stuff as well. So here's an idea, and it is an idea, and it's true. It's just we don't want people necessarily to know about this one, that the world could exist without Klal Yisrael. They hate us when really they might think it's not a good idea to lose all these Jews. If they thought that they can get by perfectly well without us, then boy, oh boy, things would be even worse. One last one, just as an illustration. Last week we were talking in the Shaare, we were quoting Rabbi Dessler, and I skipped over it because we had lots to get through. Again, part of the introduction to the Shaare. Rabbi Dessler was talking about the Gemara in Sanhedrin, the Kuf base, or base, if I remember rightly. The Mishnah talks about the three kings who didn't get into Olam Haba, Yerovam, Achav, and Menashe Melech Yisrael. And Rav Ashi is talking about this in the Shaare, and he refers to these three kings as his chavrusas, our chavrusas, he said to his Talmidim. We'll pick it up tomorrow, as the Americans say, we'll carry on tomorrow where we left off, and we'll talk about our chaverim. And of course, Menashe Melech Yisrael comes to him and he says, you call me your chaver? You call me your chaver? I mean, we all remember when we're in yeshiva, your chavrusa is roughly the same madriga as you. Because if it's not, then it won't be very geschmack. If he's teaching you, you'll feel miserable and you'll be bored. If you're teaching him, you'll probably feel miserable and be bored. But you want somebody who's, there's a shova b'shova. We're your chavrusas? You think your father was my chavrusa? You think you were equal to me? And he asked them a question, which is a very deep question. It sounds very superficial. How do you cut the challah? And which bit of the challah do you cut first? And it's the bit that gets crusty first. But that's obviously a metaphor. We'll go into that another time, who knows. But in this, Rabbi Dessler, let's go into this a little bit. And again, another idea, it's Torah, but it's dangerous. Ideas can be very dangerous. So, this whole essay is really in this. Sheyesh Yetzirah Tivoy. There is a Yetzirah which is Tevadik. That means it attracts us because of all the things that we know that we're attracted to in Teva, which are bad. Znus and food, too much food, and too much, all that sort of stuff, right? But there's another, V'yesh Mashehum Nachni Yetzirah Rachoni. But there's a Yetzirah which is Ruchnius, not affected by Teva. Interesting concept. So how does that work? That is the Madrega. When Menashe Melech Yisrael turns around to Rav Ashi, and remember those who weren't here, Rav Ashi who wrote the Gemara, and said, what are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about. If you had lived when I'd lived, you would have pulled up the cloak, your cloak that you wore, not cloak, your, what do you call them? Long dressy type thing, what would that be called? Robe, that's the word. You would have pulled up the robe and run to the Avodah Zarah. Now this is astonishing. He says the Madrega that Menashe Melech Yisrael lived in, the time that he lived in the Avodah Zarah, how it worked in those times, and he himself was an unbelievably high Madrega. He's demonstrated that because he slogged up Rav Ashi. But it didn't make any difference. Because the taiva, the rotzen to do bad, could mean that Madrega, that's what he calls a Yetzirah, which is Ruchnius, is even able to get you to see something which you know is true, and I'm still going to do it. You can't resist it. But there's another Madrega, and the Madrega of Tevoy, and that would be the second base of Mikdash. We all know that Chazal say, if a person does an Avera once, twice, 3 times, then what happens to the Avera? It becomes a heta. A heta, says the Gemara. No, it's a mitzvah. You see, Menashe Melech Yisrael knows he's doing something wrong. He knows he's doing something wrong. He just can't resist doing something wrong. But in our times, The way the Yetzer Hara works is we don't think we're doing things that are wrong. In fact, Rabbi Esther frames this in the form of a brilliant kasha. If Klal Yisrael can sometimes get to such a terrible madriga that the only possible cure for them is to be thrown into Golos, what on earth is the point of throwing them to Golos where they're bound to behave even worse? It's a very good question. So let me read this to you. And this is brilliant, but another dangerous idea. Nimsha b'Yetzer Hara Ruchoni yesh chesoron godol. In the Yetzer Hara of Ruchoni, if we just described it, the Yetzer Hara that applied to Menashe Melech Yisrael, she'afilu megalin la'odem es ha'emes, even if you show them what the emes is, they're not going to do tshuva. Menashe Melech Yisrael was not doing tshuva. He knew the emes. Ki hari shotef harotzen habiyah lamorad ba'emes. That the Yetzer Hara was so strong that it would make you rebel against emes. Okay. But Yetzer Hara hativoy yesh kasorin. And the Yetzer Hara of Teva's Yetzer Hara, there's another kasorin. Shafila in tichla shatayvas lo yasaboy. Even if later on the taivas that you have, particularly when somebody gets older, then the taivas you have disappear, but you still won't do tshuva. Although I can't resist telling you, there's a famous story told about Aristotle. Aristotle famously was the Rambam writes that apart from those who had Ruach HaKodesh, or Nevi'as, nobody reached an intellectual level like Aristotle. So Reb Chanan Wasserman asks on that, why didn't he believe in Hashem? Such a brain. Why didn't you believe in Hashem?
I saw it was my brother in the Seder Dara. It's like the classic history Seder.
Yes.
And it brings like some obscure letter that Aristotle wrote to his student Alexander the Great.
Uh-huh.
Says that he like all the stuff that he sees that the Jewish religion is the true one now.
Well, in actual fact, that in that Sefer talks about in the famous library of Alexandria, which was burned down. But there are many records of how at the end of his life, Aristotle became a Ger Tzedek. It's very, very interesting. Became a Ger Tzedek, tried to uproot everything he'd written before. The Greeks, if you're interested in this sort of stuff, the Greeks say that at the end of his life he went insane. But to become a Jew, as far as they're concerned, synonymous, it's the same sort of thing. All right? I mean, you think about it, it's very interesting. I think, let's go back to mathematics. I think of a bar graph. You know, when you got the idea? Various. Right. Here is, no, a philosophy, do you know what the word philosophy means? It means, well, philos is the word for love. Right? There's a town in America called Philadelphia. Right?
City of
brotherly love. Right? Philos is to love. Philo-Semitic means somebody who loves Jews. Anti-Semitic doesn't love Jews. Philos. Philosophy is somebody who loves wisdom or truth. Right? So he is the greatest brain according to the Rambam, whoever lived. But also he was another philo. He was a philanderer. Philanderer, a Baal Taiva. Okay? And there are many Sforim that talk about what a big Baal Taiva he was. So suppose he loves the truth. So we've got a bar graph, right? Here is his love of the truth. Now along comes his love for Taiva and Znus. It's there. So which one's going to win? Even if you know the truth. It's a bit like Menashe Melech Yisrael, when the Taivas for doing things that are wrong overcome your love of the emes. It's very, very similar. But what happens when a person gets older, to that particular Taiva? It goes away. It reduces. So if it reduces, it's not surprising that in that Yosef Seder Adoris, which you quoted, the actual Lashon is, how besof Yomov. He was makir the emes and became a Ger Tzedek because he had no Taivas. Therefore, the bar, here was his love for truth. Here was his love for Taiva. But naturally, when a person gets older, it changes. So now he could be makir the emes and become a Ger Tzedek. Although I think I saw in Reb Shalom of Olbo, the danger for us old guys is that when even the Taiva goes, Baruch Hashem, but then Gaiva takes over. So you have to be careful. I mean, for most people, but of course not for me. Anyway, so the Yetzer Hara, HaTeva yesh chasorin. So what's the chasorin in the Yetzer Hara of Teva? Even if your tithes go away, you will not regret it, and you won't go, as Aristotle did. Because you've trained yourself your whole life that what you've been doing wrong is not a wrong thing. It's a mitzvah. And your life, therefore, is completely corrupt and completely corrupted. But on the other hand, the other side of that coin, but if the person somehow or other in the course of his life has an experience where he gets a glimpse of the emes, then he can do tshuva. Because his whole life, he's covered it with a big sheet, a big black sheet. He's covered over the emes. It's now, raw is now something which is good. Although the Rabbi Odessa quotes from another one of his essays, the Yetzer Hara can never completely hide the emes. You always know at the end of the day what is good. Consequently, if you get a glimpse and that you see the real truth, which you've been hiding from or you've blinded yourself to, it can waken you up. I mentioned to you before Rabbi Gottlieb. There used to be an organization called AJOP, the Association of Jewish Outreach Professionals. And they used to have a conference in Baltimore once a year. And this is in the days when Kiruv Rechokim still existed, which it doesn't really anymore. We're in the post-Kiruv age. And there used to be something like 2,000 or 3,000, I can't remember the exact figure, but something like that. Kiruv professionals from every single movement in the world, apart from Lubavitch, which of course has got its own universe. Well, they would come to us, Eisha Torah and Or Samech and Dvar Yerushalayim here and Neve and all that. Thousands of Kiruv rabbis and stuff like that. And they discussed, all sorts of techniques, how to get donations. Right? And go to whole classes on how to find the rich guy and get money out of them. I can't do that stuff. And the best programs to make people who are not frum on campus. Gives them, skydiving and scuba diving and with sharks and all sorts of exciting stuff. And so they spent, I think it was 4 days, and Rabbi Gottlieb told me once, I spoke there 3 times, he was once, we were never there together, but he was once the scholar in residence. He was the Nasi of the whole event. And after 4 days of discussing best ways to make somebody from techniques, classes, tricks, they came to an incredibly interesting discovery. The best trick is a Friday night invitation. When they see that Shabbos candle or candles and they hear this, the singing at the table and you see the parents' interaction with the children, wow, it blows them away. You can get a glimpse. You see, they're not rebelling against God because they want to rebel against God. They're rebelling against God because they train themselves to think that what they believe in is right. And when they see the rest, they get that glimpse of emes, boom, it can totally turn their life around, like a Friday night invitation. It can just turn them around altogether. So basically, here's an incredible idea, but it's a dangerous one. My Rosh Hashiva was Reb Leib Gurevitz. Well, Reb Leib Gurevitz and Reb Leib Lapien, brothers-in-law, the Rosh Hashiva, Gateshead in my time. Reb Leib Gurevitz once told me that somebody once said to him, the reason Mashiach doesn't come is because of you frummers. This guy wasn't frum, but he must have had some sort of frum background. It's all your fault. Doesn't it say somewhere in the Talmud that the Mashiach will come if everybody is all good, or it's a generation that's kulu chayiv, who are all bad? Yes. Well, what proportion of Klal Yisrael are you guys? You're the tiny bit. If you just ate bacon the way that we ate bacon, then we'd be all bad and the Mashiach would come. It's all your fault. Just as the Rambam said about people who twist the words of Hashem Yisborach, here's a concept that can be twisted as well. So words are critical. You've got to be careful what you say. Words can be dangerous and concepts can be dangerous in the wrong hands. Okay. Let's look at our Alshich then. So with that in mind, let's turn to the Alshich. You've got it on the page there. The Alshich asked 8 questions, which I'm not going to go. We're just going to jump in. And And let's see if I can find the place. Omnum. No, that's the wrong place. Yeah, I've got it. Omnum lavo elabir. Do you have that at the top of the page? Okay. So we're talking about, here's the pasuk that the Alshich is discussing. V'yikravu yemei Yisrael lamus, and the days came in which it was Roy, or soon, that Yisrael was going to die. V'yikravu l'banoi l'Yosef, and he calls his son to Yosef, Yom Eloi im nom asasichem beinecha. If I find favor in your eyes, please make sure you don't bury me in Mitzrayim. And that's the thing. Now the Alshich asks 8 questions on that, which we're going to miss out. Just go straight to Omnum. Lavo el habir, to understand exactly what Yaakov was asking and why he was asking this, nosim lev el maimer Rabbi Yochanan b'Maseches Tainus. Let's consider what Rabbi Yochanan said in the Gemara in Tainus. She'omer Yakov Avinu lo met. Rabbi Yochanan said Yakov Avinu never died. V'ki bichti chantu chanot chantoya b'sifti satayo. To which there's a challenge. I thought it said that they were maspid him. I thought they said they embalmed him. And somebody embalms you, you're very unlikely to be alive for very long. Right? So how now? What are you talking about? That Yakov Avinu is not dead? They embalmed him. And so he said, Mishani, Mikra ani dorish. I've got a drosha. I've got a diak and a posuk. And the posuk near me, Amid Yud, I don't know if you have it there, but Ata, Al Tira Avdi Yaakov, Hashem says, don't be afraid, Avdi Yaakov, Bezarechom et Shivam, I will bring back your seed, your children from this horrible land. Maki Shul Lazaroi, therefore there's a hekesh in the posuk, there's a connection in the posuk between Yaakov and his children, Ma'azara B'chaim, and his children are alive, therefore obviously Yaakov is alive as well. Are you happy with the drosha? Makes sense? The Alshich says it doesn't. Says the Alshich, okay, look, isn't this a bit difficult? Ma mashav loy al kashosa. What sort of answer is this to the question that he challenges? Mikri ani dorish. What do you mean Yakov Avinu is alive when we know the Pasuk says he's dead? You've got a drosha from the Pasuk. Listen to the Alshich. It's quite tongue-in-cheek, this. Viki al-shehu dorish mikra tis battle akushya. Because you've got a drosha in the Pasuk, that takes away the question. The Adarabah, the contrary. Tis battle a drosha he. The emes, the Pasuk is mevatel your drosha. Does that make sense? The Pasuk says he died. You've got a drosha that links, very, very nice, very good. A drosha, somehow you want to say it means he's still alive. But the Pasuk says he's dead. You've got a drosha, I've got a Pasuk. So what are you talking about? And why does he challenge him? Why doesn't he challenge him from the Pasuk which says, Vayam Yisrael al Yosef, Hine Anochi Mes. I'm dying. Or Vayikra Yemei Yisrael Lamus. Or the other pasuk which says Vayigva b'Yosef elamo, and he, I don't know how you translate the word Vayigva in English. Is it he expired? He stopped breathing, something like that. Va'oid shlohoylo lahakshus b'ktin that chantu. And what are you saying from your argument that when he challenged Rabbi Yochanan, he said, does that mean to say that the pasuk's talking, nonsense? It's not talking. It doesn't imply what you say it implies. They took out his insides. They opened up his stomach and took out his liver and his kidneys and his lung and his heart, and it's very hard to live without them. I find myself personally very attached to all of the aforementioned organs. Okay? Now, if you look down, you should see V'la'amad ela inyan. V'la'amad ela inyan, Nazar al-loshen ha-mikra, ki alo yipole. Look very carefully at what the Pesukim actually say. Ki kol mokam asher yasker ha-misa li-Yakov b'shem Yisrael yachneu. Whenever it uses the word about Yaakov being dead, it doesn't call him Yaakov. It doesn't say Yaakov died. It only says Yisrael died. Yisrael Ubemokoim, and whenever asher yaskir gevia ba'asifa, when it says, and that's why I'm struggling to find a translation for this, the word gevia, which means, let's call it expire, ba'asifa, and gather to his people, a euphemism for death. Beli haskaras mavas b'shem Yakov yakne oisai. Then generally, he's called Yaakov, right? So Yaakov, it never said Yaakov died. It says Yisrael died, but isn't it the same thing? No, it's not. Okay. Kihine Nemer, it says, V'yama Yisrael al Yosef amos apam. Yisrael said, I'm going to die. V'yama Yisrael al Yosef, hine anochi meis. V'yikro yeme Yisrael amus. Ach beYaakov lo Nemer rak Gevia. But with Yaakov, something called Gevia occurs. It says later on, Yaakov tzabas abonov, v'yigva v'yosef elamov. And then that. So what's the distinction? So now it gets a bit flowery. B'hinei machmas kushya zu ra'isi gever chochem boyev zesatzmoas. Mutzais. And that is the posuk in Tehillim. Mis ametz lahamid. That question should raise your interest. Anybody who has a mighty thinking mind. Ki godel geder shem Yaakov mishem Yisrael. And you might turn around and say, well, if that's the case, it seems that Yaakov seems a much greater name than Yisrael. Because Yisrael died. But Yaakov never died. Now that's, of course, the opposite way that we think about it. Yisrael is supposed to be the name that he gets in a higher madrega. But according to this, it would seem to imply that Yaakov was the greater name. Yaakov didn't die, but Yisrael died. B'shal Cain nimsis misa b'Yisrael v'lo b'Yaakov. Because there was misa by Yisrael, but not for Yaakov. That's an astonishing conclusion to reach. I want to make it quite clear, it's the opposite. When Yaakov was called Yisrael, as Nisaisav Beruchai V'Nishmosa Yisran or Yokar Rom V'Nisa Ma'oid Alashar Hoyasa B'Tchila. When he was given the name Yisrael, it was a designation, a description of him having reached a madrega much, much greater than the madrega of Yaakov. Of course, he is Yaakov, but at an earlier stage. Sometimes you think of a musician or an artist, their earlier work is very fine work, but compared to the later work, when he's become a true master, then, so spiritually speaking, when he became a true master, when his works were total masterpieces, he's Yisrael. Now, what does death mean? It means that the nefesh leaves the body. Then the madrega, we're getting into all sorts of Kabbalistic things here, but nefesh, neshama, and all these different aspects of what's in every single one of us, hu asher nistalak mimena be'etzim. That's what left him. Yitzah bo loshen misa, with regards to yistadik, and therefore it's appropriate to use the word misa. Because that aspect, that extra aspect of Kedusha, that neshama that came when he was Yisrael, that left and went straight to heaven. That died. That stopped being on planet Earth. So that's why it says Yisrael died. That aspect of Yaakov went back up to heaven. It was no longer here, like we normally imagine somebody dying. But the bechina, the ingredients that went up to make Yakov Avinu, when he was called Yakov Avinu, they remained. Lo nistalik. Right, Gova Kameshin Yisalev. It's just that he was as though he'd nodded off to sleep, as so often happens in my sharing. As though people he's nodded off to sleep. Shadayin, called Koichlis, Nashoi, Veruchoi, Venishmosoi, Devekim Boy Be'etzim. He was still Yaakov, but not Yisrael. That had gone up to heaven. Valkain Yaakov lo nema rak v'yigva Yosef. That's why it says he's gathered, expired. Not quite expired, as we'll see in a second. Amar b'yitzchak v'yigva Yitzchak v'yomas v'Yosef. Fine, now Alkain. We're coming to that in a second. Valkain hitiva asher dibru Yakov Avinu lomes, and therefore it's perfectly okay. We can say that Yakov Avinu didn't die. Only Israel died. Shehu al bechinas Yaakov be'esha hoya Avinu Why is it called Yakov Avinu? Because when he was Yaakov, that's when he was Avinu. That's when he fathered the children that would be Klal Yisrael. It's after that he becomes Yisrael. Shehu terem nikra shemo Yisrael. V'kol oisa hakoyach nisha shakua b'Yisrael. And all that kedusha which had been, as it were, absorbed into his body, higam sheyes tzadikim nikram yishne ofer. This, incidentally, says the Alshich, should not be such a surprise to you. After all, we've got many tzaddikim who are died but didn't really die. And there's a riot to this. Rabbeinu Kodesh. So Rabbi Yonah Anossi, Shoy Mekadesh Babesa B'Kol Leil Shabbos. So after he was dead, he used to come home every Friday night, knock on the door, open the door and say, hello dear, hello children, I'll just make Kiddush. Right? He's dead. Apparently not. Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon, Shoy Shayfet is Yisrael es v'shtayim shonim b'soich chadra achar zelukai. Apparently, I don't know if he's buried in his room or maybe he was just there, his body was there, but for 22 years after he was technically dead, asked the doctors he's dead, but he carried on passing Shalos for 22 years. It's Gemara. That's Gemara Bov Metzia. And paid Aladom and base, if I remember correctly, or if I read correctly. Rav Achai bar Yeshia, Shediber im Rav Nachum im Torkivarosai. They used to have conversations from the grave. Amazing stuff. Rav Nachum would go to the grave, and his Rebbe, or he would get he could ask Shilas. How that was able to happen? Because the koyach of the nefesh remained attached to the bodies. Because the bodies were in such a high madriga that they didn't rot. That's going to be crucially important in a second when we answer Shimi's question. But not the ruach and the neshama. That had gone up to heaven. Yaakov is much, much higher madriga than that. So therefore the Shekhinah could rest on Yaakov even though Yaakov is dead, because Yaakov's technically not dead. Yaakov's still there. Yisrael's gone up to heaven. Called Koichas Nasha Asher Hoyaloi Bechayav. Okay, Nishar Bekadusha Al Seder de Golem Kanoidim. And that's sorry?
Because he's still alive?
Yes, yes.
Dead
Yeah.
is no Kedusha.
Well, the Shekhinah would be hard for the Shekhinah couldn't sit with them. Okay, fine. Now, with regards to the Shiloh that Shimi put to us a few seconds ago, how could, if he's still alive, but if you take out somebody's insides and stuff like that. So I didn't print it out for you, but the Alshich later on, if you medayik in the Pesukim, when Yosef talks to the Roif, his avodim, he commands his avodim and his Roifim. To do what? Not to it says to do it, but he didn't let them do it. First of all, it was only the Roifim. The Alshich says that the avodim, their job was to take out the insides. And the Roifim, they beautified the body. And that's apparently how this worked. So the messy job was given to the avodim. And then the Roifim would beautify the body if it wasn't stitched up and do everything to make it beautiful. If you look carefully in the Pasuk, it's only the Roifim who do that bit. But that bit was not necessary because it didn't rot. There was no necessity. The reason you take out the insides is because it rots. And then they stuff it through whatever they do, and they literally inject some sort of preservative into the veins, and it goes around. Horrible stuff. And they didn't need to do that to Yakov Avinu. So it was only, says the Alshich, that it looked as though in order to do what? If they see that he's not rotting, and that's why Yaakov wanted to go up and be buried in Eretz Yisrael, they'll make me into a god. So he goes through the 40-day process of pretending that he's been embalmed in order that they will have a logical, rational reason that he has died, and won't make him into a god. That's what Yaakov wanted to happen. Fine. So this is an extraordinarily dangerous idea. I think you can see why. The idea of people not dying is a real Jewish idea, but it can easily be corrupted. There has just been a celebration. I thought it was so wonderful. Somebody said to me, in fact, it was Shimi who said this to me. We were walking back from Shul the other week. he said, one of the nice things about being here is you don't know when it's Xmas. You don't know when it's Xmas, Christmas, right? There are no trees, although I live across the road from a church, so there is a tree if you look, if you want to look. There is a big one there. But you don't know that. And then we discussed New Year's. Is it New Year's? Oh, that was Venus. That was yesterday or something like that. You can feel the Kedusha of this. But the emissaries, here's somebody who claimed to have conquered death. But of course, the Gemara says that even the littlest time I could bring a dead body back. That's not such a big deal. But for them, that's a big thing. Knowing, getting access to this, seeing this, could give them ammunition. You see? Great. Now, of course, just as the Rambam says, you take the thing and you twist it and corrupt it. If somebody wants to tell you that, there's such a great person, he never died, let's go and ask him a shaila. Right? Or let's go and watch him making Kiddush on Friday night. Let's go and see his body doesn't rot like Yakov Avinu. But if it can be easily corrupted and twisted and turned. If you're Yakov Avinu, you don't die. If you're Rabbi Yehuda Anossi, you don't die. These people don't die. These are the meat in Jewish history. Anybody who wants to claim that Rishoim, like the gentleman I was referring to, who sponsored the Christmas tree movement, was such a person. And you've got to be extremely careful what you say. It's got to be real. And sometimes, that's why, of course, we talk about the Chazal and their chidos and their riddles. We often speak in riddles. Why is the Medrash so full of things that frankly look nonsense? Because it's written in code. Knowing that our enemies, you know this from the Nazis. The Nazis used to go through the Talmud, take out bits out of context, say the Jews say terrible things about enslaving Goyim and stuff like that. There would be big trials all through the 1930s. The Jews would sue the Nazis in court, but all the newspapers would be full of, people. Sometimes it's better to keep quiet about things. But you can take ideas and corrupt them and twist them into all sorts of pretzels, all sorts of different shapes. In fact, once we know that Chazal speak in riddles, or speak more accurately in code, then all you need to access is the cipher. Why did they speak in code? Because they knew that our enemies would use our teachings against us. During the Second World War, the BBC, which was once sort of okay, organization, they used to send coded messages to the French resistance. Right? So they'd have one program, whatever in French, and whatever, just music or whatever. And then at the end of it, the fellow would say in French, and we've got a message for our friends in France. The green rainbow has a red nose, and the fence fell over and turned into chocolate. Now, if you don't know that this is code, you would say, do you know what I heard on the radio last night? The English, they've gone fou, they've gone crazy, they're talking about green rainbows and with red noses. But if you know that in actual fact it's code, then you go, wow, I wonder what they're saying. Chazal often wrote things which are very dangerous in such a way that fools are banned from entrer into D, they say in French, from being able to get in there. But it's dangerous stuff, and if you know it's dangerous stuff, you have to be careful how you say it. But the greatest danger is teaching not dangerous stuff, but not teaching it well. Okay. I'm just going to switch off.